clear this area now. Check the passenger side.
The rain was merciless that night. Somewhere on the outskirts of Busan, headlights cut through the thick darkness, then metal, then fire, then complete silence. By morning, every news channel across South Korea was carrying the same devastating headline. Fatal crash on the Busan Expressway. No survivors. One woman, 9 months pregnant, sitting completely alone in the apartment they shared, watched that screen and felt her entire world stop breathing. She cried until she couldn't anymore. She buried him in her heart because there was nothing else to bury, and she spent the next 8 years believing he was gone forever, until today, and the truth was more shocking than the crash itself. If you're listening right now, help me prove my mother wrong. She said this channel would never reach 2,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this, stories about regret, redemption, and the consequences of our choices, deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our powerful stories. Give this video a like if you're already hooked by what you just heard. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Africa, Canada, Australia. We love connecting with our global family. And please share this video with friends and family who believe in second chances and facing the truth. Your support helps us create more incredible content that touches hearts. Now, let's continue this emotional journey. Renee Thompson was born in the United States of America, but Busan, South Korea was the only home she had ever truly known. Her parents, Robert and Gloria Thompson, were African Americans who packed up their lives in America and moved to South Korea when Renee was still a very young child. Her father, Robert, was a quiet, hard-working man who built something meaningful for his family in a country far from where he was born. He passed away years later, leaving behind a wife who never stopped missing him, and a daughter who carried his name like it meant everything. And it did. Gloria never went back to America after Robert passed. Busan had become her home, too. Her life, her routines, her memories all rooted deeply in this city. She lived on her own not far from Renee, and the two of them remained as close as a mother and daughter could possibly be. Gloria would show up at Renee's apartment on Sunday mornings without calling first, a habit Renee had long since stopped fighting. She would let herself in with her spare key, set food on the counter, and make herself completely at home. "Mama," Renee said one Sunday, appearing from the hallway still in her robe, "you cannot keep walking into my apartment like this." Gloria didn't even turn around. "I carried you for 9 months. This apartment is the least you owe me." Renee stood there for a moment, then shook her head slowly with a smile she couldn't stop. Some arguments weren't worth having. Renee had built a good life for herself in Busan. She was financially comfortable, fully independent, and completely sure of who she was. She worked at one of the most luxurious 5-star hotels in all of Busan. Not because she needed the money, but because she was genuinely exceptional at what she did. She managed the front desk with a quiet professionalism that her colleagues respected and her supervisors depended on. She owned her apartment, paid her own bills, and answered to nobody. She had dated before, a few relationships over the years that had come and gone without leaving much behind. Nothing serious. Nothing that made her rearrange her life. She was careful with her heart in the way that people become careful when they have spent enough time understanding their own worth. "You work too much," Diane told her one afternoon over lunch. Diane, her closest friend since their college days in Korea, a warm, vibrant woman originally from Trinidad and Tobago who had made South Korea her permanent home just as Renee had. "I work the right amount," Renee replied, stirring her drink. "You eat lunch at your desk 4 days out of 5, Diane said flatly. "That is not the right amount." Renee smiled. "Some of us have goals, Diane." Diane pointed her fork across the table. "Some of us also need to leave the building occasionally." Renee laughed and shook her head. She was happy, genuinely, quietly happy with the life she had built entirely on her own terms. The night Kai John walked through those hotel doors, everything in the lobby shifted, without warning. Renee was behind the front desk finishing a late shift when she felt it. Like the air pressure in the entire room changed the moment he stepped inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark, perfectly fitted suit that looked like it was made specifically for his body. His presence was a kind that made people instinctively step aside, without fully understanding why they were doing it. A senior colleague leaned close to Renee and whispered carefully, "That's Kai John." The name meant nothing to her. She had no idea what it meant in the streets and shadows of Busan. He approached the front desk and looked at her directly. Not through her the way powerful men often look at people they consider beneath them, but fully at her, like she was the only person in that entire lobby worth seeing. "Good evening," Renee said professionally, her posture straight. "Welcome. How can I help you?" He looked at her for just a moment longer than felt normal. "I have a reservation," he said, his voice low and even. "Under John." She typed his name into the system without looking up. "Of course, Mr. John. Everything is ready for you." He collected his key card, but didn't move immediately. "Thank you." He paused, reading her name badge slowly. "Renee." The way he said her name, unhurried, deliberate, made her look up, but he had already turned and walked away. He came back the next evening, and the evening after that. By the fourth visit, Renee noticed he was never actually meeting anyone. He would settle into the hotel lounge, sit with one drink, stay exactly long enough, and always find a reason to pass the front desk before leaving. On the fifth evening, he walked straight to her and leaned slightly against the counter. "Do you ever take breaks?" he asked. Renee looked up from her screen slowly. "Excuse me." He held her gaze without any trace of embarrassment. "I'm asking if you eat dinner, like a normal person." She studied him carefully for a quiet moment. "I do," she said. "Good," he replied. "Then have dinner with me tomorrow." Renee held his gaze steadily. "Mr. John, I don't make a habit of having dinner with hotel guests." He nodded slowly like he had expected exactly that answer. "I'm not asking as a hotel guest," he said quietly. "I'm asking as someone who has sat in that lounge for evenings in a row, try and find a reasonable excuse to talk to you." Renee blinked. She had expected that level of honesty from a man who looked like he never explained himself to anyone. She looked at him for a long, quiet moment, weighing everything about him carefully. "One dinner," she said finally. Something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough. "One dinner," he agreed, quietly and straightened up from the counter. That first dinner lasted 3 hours. Kai took her to a quiet restaurant tucked away from the crowded parts of Busan, where conversations could breathe and time moved at its own pace. He asked about her father early in the evening, genuinely, without it feeling like small talk. "Your name, Thompson," he said. "That's not a Korean name." Renee smiled slightly. "No, it isn't. My father was American. He came here when I was very young and never left. He passed away a few years ago." Kai was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said, and it didn't sound automatic. It sounded like he actually meant it. "What was he like?" Renee looked at him, a little surprised by the question. Most people moved quickly past condolences. "Quiet," she said softly. "Hard-working. The kind of man who never needed a room to notice him, but the room always did anyway." Kai considered that carefully. He sounds like someone worth knowing. Renee felt something warm move quietly through her chest at those words. They talked for the rest of that evening about growing up in Busan, about belonging completely to somewhere that wasn't where you originally started. He listened to everything, without once reaching for his phone. She went home that night and sat with the feeling for a long time. It was only dinner, she kept telling herself. But it hadn't felt like only dinner, and she already knew it. He called 2 days later, not with another dinner invitation, just to talk. They stayed on the phone for almost 2 hours that evening, the conversation moving easily between topics without any effort at all. He called again 3 days after that. Then they met for coffee, then for another dinner, then for a walk along the Busan oceanfront on a quiet Tuesday evening, when neither of them had anywhere pressing to be. Weeks turned into months, and somewhere inside all of it something real was quietly growing between them. One evening at their usual cafe, Renee looked across the table at him and said carefully, "What is this Kai?" He looked up from his cup. "What do you mean?" She held his gaze directly. "I mean, what are we doing? Because I don't date casually. I never have. And if that's what this is to you, then I need to know that now before it becomes something I can't easily walk away from. He was quiet for a moment. He set his cup down slowly. It's not casual, he said. It hasn't been casual since the first evening I walked past your desk and couldn't make myself leave. Renee looked at him for a long, still moment. Then say it properly, she said quietly. He looked at her steadily across that small table. I want to be with you, he said. Only you. That's what this is. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, she said quietly. Then that's what it is. She told Gloria the following Sunday. Gloria had arrived at her door with food as usual, and they were sitting together at the kitchen table when Renee set down her fork and said simply, Mama, I'm seeing someone. Gloria looked up immediately. The fork in her hand stopped moving. Seeing someone, she repeated slowly. How long? Renee kept her expression calm. A few months. Gloria put her fork down completely and folded her hands on the table, which Renee recognized immediately as her serious position. What is his name? Kai, Renee said. Kai John. Gloria was quiet for a moment. Korean? Renee nodded. Another silence. What does he do? He runs business investments. Renee said. Gloria studied her daughter's face for a long, careful moment, the way only a mother can study someone, reading everything beneath the surface. Are you happy? She asked finally. The question was simple and direct, and it went straight to the point the way Gloria always did. Renee met her mother's eyes. Yes, Mama, she said quietly. I actually am. Gloria looked at her for another long moment. Then she picked up her fork again. Then I want to meet him, she said matter-of-factly. Soon. Not eventually. Soon. Renee smiled despite herself. I'll arrange it. Gloria pointed her fork gently. And tell him to come hungry. I'll cook. Renee laughed softly. That was Gloria's way of saying she was already willing to welcome him. Food first. Questions after. Gloria met Kai 2 weeks later on a Sunday evening at her own apartment. Renee had warned him beforehand. My mother is warm, she said carefully in the car on the way over. But she is also very direct. She will ask you questions, and she will mean every single one of them. Kai kept his eyes on the road. I can handle questions. Renee looked at him sideways. These aren't normal questions, Kai. This is Gloria Thompson. She will look at you and decide in the first 5 minutes whether she trusts you. He glanced over at her briefly. Then I'll make sure the first 5 minutes count. Gloria opened the door before they even knocked. She had clearly been watching for them. She looked at Kai for a long, quiet moment before stepping aside to let them in. Dinner was warm and the conversation moved carefully at first. Gloria asking about his background, his family, how long he'd been in Busan. Kai answered everything directly and without performance. At one point, Gloria looked at him across the table and said plainly, My daughter has been through enough loss in her life. I need to know your intentions are genuine. The table went quiet. Renee felt her stomach tighten. Kai held Gloria's gaze without flinching. My intentions are completely genuine, he said steadily. I'm not here to add anything she has already carried. Gloria looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and passed him more food. Renee quietly exhaled. 2 full years passed. 2 years of Sunday dinners and late-night walks and phone calls that ran longer than either of them planned. 2 years of learning each other's rhythms. How Kai took his coffee. How Renee needed complete quiet for the first 20 minutes after waking up. How they argued about small things and resolved them before the night was over without ever letting anything fester. The relationship had grown into something deep and solid and completely real. One evening, they were sitting on Kai's apartment balcony, watching the Busan city lights spread out below them, when he said it simply and without ceremony. I want you here, he said, every morning, not just some of them. Renee looked at him sideways. You say that like it's the easiest thing in the world. He turned to face her fully. Isn't it? She was quiet for a moment. Moving in together meant everything all at once. It meant trusting someone completely with your daily life, your mornings, your most private self. And she had spent a long time protecting that carefully. Kai, she said slowly, I need you to understand what you're asking. If I move in with you, that means something real to me. That means we are serious. He held her gaze without flinching. "It means something real to me, too," he said quietly. "That is exactly why I'm asking." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Give me 2 weeks to think about it." He nodded without pressure. "Take whatever time you need." She moved in 6 weeks later. And from the very first morning she woke up in that apartment beside him, something deep inside her settled completely, like she had finally arrived somewhere she hadn't known she was looking for. Their life together felt natural from the very beginning. She kept her job, her independence, her own money, and her own sense of self fully intact. She cooked on Sunday mornings while Kai sat at the kitchen counter watching her with that quiet look he had, the one that made her feel like the most interesting person in any room. They burned rice together and laughed about it. They argued about small things and never went to bed without resolving them. Gloria came for Sunday dinners regularly now, sitting at their table, eating Kai's food, gradually and quietly letting him into the part of her heart she protected most fiercely for her daughter's sake. Diane would visit and pull Renee aside in the kitchen just to whisper, "He is different from anyone you have ever brought around. I hope you know that." And Renee did know. She felt it every single day. She had no idea about the other side of his world. No idea what his name truly meant in the darkest corners of Busan. She loved the man she saw inside those walls, present, warm, completely real, without ever knowing the full truth of who he was outside them. Then one evening she sat across from him at their kitchen table and told him she was pregnant. The words landed in the apartment like something physical. Kai went completely still across the table from her. The kind of stillness that isn't emptiness, but the opposite of it. Full, overwhelmed. His eyes stayed on her face without moving. Renee watched him carefully, her hands wrapped tight around her cup, heart beating faster than she was showing. 1 second passed, then another. Then he stood up slowly from his chair and walked around the table to her. He crouched down in front of her the way he sometimes did when something mattered more than words could carry. He took both her hands in his and looked up at her face from below. His jaw was tight. His eyes were completely full. "Say it again," he said quietly. She searched his face, trying to understand everything she was seeing there. "I'm pregnant, Kai," she said again, softer this time. Something broke open behind his eyes. He pressed his forehead gently against her hands and stayed there for a long, still moment without saying anything at all. When he finally looked up, his voice came out low and unsteady in a way she had never heard from before. "We're going to be okay," he said. "All 3 of us." Renee felt her eyes fill immediately. "You're not upset?" she whispered. He looked at her like the question made no sense to him at all. "Upset?" he said quietly. "Renee, I have spent 2 years building something real with you. Why would the best thing that could happen inside that feel like something to be upset about?" A tear ran down her face before she could stop it. He reached up and wiped it away slowly with his thumb. They stayed like that for a very long time, just the 2 of them in that kitchen, holding on to each other and to everything they were about to become. The weeks that followed were some of the warmest of Renee's life. Kai was different after finding out, not dramatically, not with grand gestures, but in the quiet ways that actually matter. He came home earlier. He sat beside her on the couch in the evenings with one hand resting gently on her growing belly, without saying anything, just present, just completely there. He started researching things she never asked him to research. Baby furniture, hospitals, the best doctors in Busan. He would leave articles open on his phone, and when she raised an eyebrow at him, he would simply shrug. "Research," he said. "You're doing research," she repeated, "on strollers." He looked completely unbothered. There are a lot of options. She pressed her lips together to stop the smile. Gloria cried when Renee told her. Properly cried, standing right there in the kitchen with both hands pressed over her mouth. "Mama," Renee said softly. Gloria shook her head firmly. "Don't. Just let me have this moment." Diane, on the other hand, screamed so loudly into the phone that Renee had to hold away from her ear completely. "I knew it," Diane shouted. "I knew from the moment I saw how that man looked at you that this was going somewhere." Renee laughed until her sides hurt. But underneath all the warmth and joy, something in Renee quietly noted that Kai still disappeared sometimes, still took calls in the other room with the door closed. She never pushed. She trusted him. And so she let it go every single time, folding it neatly into the part of herself that always chose love over suspicion. She was 8.5 months pregnant when Kai told her he needed to make a short trip to Seoul. They were in the bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. He was near the wardrobe packing a small bag. She watched him for a moment before saying anything. "How long?" she asked. 2 days, he said without turning around. 3 at most. She looked at the back of his head. Kai. Something in the way she said his name made him stop and turn around. "I am 8.5 months pregnant," she said steadily. He crossed the room immediately and sat beside her on the bed. "I know," he said. "I would not go if it wasn't necessary. This is something I have been working on for a long time. It closes this week, and I cannot miss it." She studied his face carefully. "What kind of deal requires you be physically in Seoul right now? Can it not be done by phone?" He held her gaze. "It can't." She was quiet for a moment, searching his face for something she couldn't quite name. Something about his energy that evening felt slightly different from his usual calm. But she didn't push. She had never pushed. 2 days, she said finally. "Not 3. 2. He took her face gently in both his hands. 2 days, he said. "I promise you." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, slow and deliberate, like he was trying to memorize something important. When he pulled back, his eyes stayed on her face a moment longer than felt necessary. And that small extra moment sat between them like something neither of them knew how to name out loud. The night he left was cold and heavy with rain. Renee stood at their apartment door, watching him button his coat in the hallway, while his driver waited downstairs. He kept pausing, checking his phone, putting it away, checking it again. "You're nervous," she said quietly from the doorway. He looked up at her. "I'm fine." She studied him carefully. "You check your phone when something is sitting on you, Kai. You've done it since the day I met you." He stopped what he was doing and looked at her fully. Something moved behind his eyes for just one brief moment. Something she saw but couldn't read before it was gone. Then he crossed the hallway to her and pulled her carefully into his arms, one large hand resting gently against her round belly, the other arm holding her close. She felt him exhale slowly and deliberately against her hair, like he was releasing something. "I love you," he said quietly into the top of her head. "I love you, and I love this baby, and I will be back before you even have time to miss me." She wrapped her arms carefully around him. "I already miss you," she said softly. He held on for another long moment, longer than usual, before finally stepping back. He looked at her one last time. His eyes moved slowly over her face like he was taking a photograph of it. Then he turned and walked toward the elevator, without looking back. The doors closed. She stood alone in that hallway for a moment. Then she went back inside, locked the door, and pressed both hands flat against her belly in the silence. Something felt off. She couldn't name it. She just stood there for a long time before finally going to bed. She woke at 2 in the morning to her phone, lighting up the dark bedroom. She reached for it half asleep, expecting a message from Kai telling her he had arrived safely. Instead, she saw Diane's name flashing urgently across the screen. She answered immediately. "Diane." A pause. A strange, suffocating pause that lasted just long enough to make Renee's stomach drop completely. "Renee." Diane's voice was completely wrong. Too careful, too tight, too controlled. "Turn on the news right now." Renee sat up slowly. "What? Why? Diane, what is going on?" "Just turn on," Diane said quietly. "Please, right now." Renee reached for the remote with a hand that was already trembling without her permission. The television filled the dark bedroom with cold blue light. Breaking news scrolling across every single channel. Fatal crash on the highway between Busan and Seoul. Multiple vehicles. A fire that burned violently through the night. And then the words that destroyed everything inside her. No survivors confirmed. "Diane." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Diane, what is this?" "I know." Diane said on the other end, her own voice cracking completely open. "I know. I'm already on my way right now. Just stay on the phone with me, okay? Don't hang up. I'm coming." But Renee couldn't speak anymore. She could only stare at the wreckage burning on that screen, at the dark rain-soaked highway swallowed by fire and smoke and emergency lights. Her hand dropped slowly to her stomach where the baby was still moving. Gently, innocently, completely unaware that the entire world had just collapsed outside. And she just sat there in the dark, phone pressed to her ear, Diane's voice calling her name over and over, completely still, completely broken, completely alone. Diane arrived within 20 minutes, still in her night clothes, hair uncombed, eyes already red and swollen. She came through the door and went straight to Renee without saying a single word, and just held her. Renee couldn't cry at first. She was too still, too frozen inside, like her body hadn't fully accepted what her eyes had just seen on that screen. They sat together on the couch in the dark with the television still going, reporters standing at the crash site in the rain, emergency vehicles everywhere, the burned and twisted wreckage of multiple cars spread across a dark highway. Maybe it's wrong, Renee said after a very long silence. Her voice was flat and far away. Maybe you wasn't on that road, Diane. Maybe it's a mistake. Diane held her tighter and said nothing because there was nothing honest she could say back. By morning, every news channel in South Korea was carrying the same devastating story. The most feared and powerful figure in all of Busan, confirmed among the dead, no survivors. Renee thought of Kai's brother then, the only family Kai had anywhere in this world. She found the number from the small piece of paper Kai had placed in her phone case months ago, saying quietly one evening, "Just in case you ever need to reach my brother." Her hand shook violently as she dialed. It rang 4 times. A man's voice answered, rough and hollow, and already broken by what he had heard. "I saw the news," Renee said quietly, her voice barely holding itself together. "I don't know what to do. I don't know who to call. I don't know anything." A long, painful silence on the other end. When the man finally spoke, his voice was low and completely destroyed. "Neither do I," he said. "There is nothing, no body, no word from anyone, nothing at all." Another silence stretched between two strangers connected only by the man they had both just lost. Renee closed her eyes. She pressed her free hand flat against her stomach where the baby was still moving. Gently, innocently, completely unaware that the world outside had just fallen apart. She thanked him quietly and ended the call. Then she sat back on that couch and wept until her whole body had absolutely nothing left to give. Gloria was at Renee's door within the hour. She came in quietly, took one look at her daughter sitting on that couch, and sat down beside her without saying a word. She pulled Renee into her arms the way she had when Renee was a little girl, completely and without any condition at all. The 3 of them, Renee, Gloria, and Diane, stayed like that through the rest of that long night and to the hollow days that followed. Renee stopped eating properly. She would sit at the kitchen table and stare at Kai's empty chair. At the coffee cup he had left on the counter the morning he walked out. She couldn't bring herself to move it. One afternoon, Gloria set a plate of food in front of her and sat down across the table. "You have to eat, baby," she said gently. Renee stared at the plate without seeing it. "I'm not hungry, Mama." Gloria reached across and took both her hands firmly in hers. "I know you're not," she said quietly, "but that baby inside you is hungry. And right now, that baby is the most important thing in this world. You hear me?" Renee looked at her mother for a long, still moment. Her eyes filled slowly and completely. "I don't know how to do this without him, Mama," she whispered. "I don't know how to do any of this." Gloria held her hands tighter. "You do," she said steadily. "You don't know it yet, but you do. And we are not going anywhere. Not me, not Diane. You are not doing this alone, baby. Not for a single day." Renee dropped her head, and she wept again, but she picked up the fork, and she ate. 2 weeks after the accident, Renee went into labor at 3 in the morning. Gloria was there within minutes. She had barely been leaving the apartment since that first terrible night. Diane grabbed her hospital bag from beside the front door, where she had kept it ready and waiting for days. They rushed through the empty rain-wet Busan streets to the hospital, Gloria holding Renee's hand in the back of the car, talking to her steadily, keeping her anchored. "Breathe, baby," Gloria kept saying. "Just breathe. I'm right here." The delivery was long and completely exhausting. And in the middle of it all, between the pain and the effort and the bright hospital lights, Renee kept thinking about Kai, about the promise he had made her standing in that hallway, about the way his eyes had moved slowly over her face before the elevator doors closed, about the nursery they had started planning together, about all the things he would never see. And then, in the early gray hours of a cold Busan morning, Noah entered the world. He arrived loudly and without hesitation, crying the moment he took his first breath, strong and insistent and full of an undeniable fierce life. The nurses placed him carefully into Renee's arms. She looked down at his face for the very first time, and everything else went completely quiet inside her. He had Kai's nose, Kai's jaw, Kai's quiet intensity already written into his tiny brand new features. "Hi, baby," Renee whispered against his forehead. "I've got you. I've got you." Gloria was crying softly in the corner of the room. Diane had both hands pressed tightly over her mouth. And nobody said the name they were all thinking. Nobody needed to. The months that followed were the hardest of Renee's life. She functioned. She had to, for Noah. But functioning and truly living were two completely different things, and she felt the distance between them every single day. She moved through her routines carefully and quietly, doing everything a good mother was supposed to do, while carrying something enormous and invisible on the inside that never fully lifted. Busan became unbearable slowly. Not all at once, but piece by piece. The restaurant they used to walk past together. The ocean front where they had their first real conversation. The small cafe with the corner booth and the same order every time. Every single corner of that city carried his face, and she was not strong enough anymore to keep walking into those memories every day with a newborn on her hip and grief sitting permanently on her chest. One Sunday evening, she sat across from Gloria at the kitchen table, while Noah slept quietly in the next room. "Mama," she said carefully, "I think I need to leave Busan." Gloria looked up slowly from her cup. "Leave and go where?" "Incheon," Renee said. "Far enough that I can breathe again, but close enough that you're still near me." Gloria was quiet for a long, thoughtful moment. "Running doesn't fix what's on the inside of you, baby," she said gently. Renee looked at her mother with eyes that were exhausted all the way down to the bone. "I know that, Mama," she said quietly. "I'm not running. I just cannot breathe here anymore. Every corner I turn, he's there, and I can't keep doing that to myself." Gloria looked at her daughter for a long, careful moment. Then she reached across the table and covered her hand with both of hers. "Okay," she said quietly. "Then we figure out together." And that was that. What actually happened to Kai John on that dark, rainy highway was something the world outside that one hospital never fully knew. He was pulled from the wreckage barely alive, the only survivor of a crash that had destroyed everything and everyone else around him. Emergency responders found him unconscious, critically injured, buried deep under twisted metal and shattered glass in the pouring rain. He was rushed to a hospital far from Busan, a city where nobody recognized his face. Nobody knew his name, and nobody knew anything about the woman he had left standing in a hallway with both hands pressed against her pregnant belly. His injuries were catastrophic. Multiple broken bones. Severe internal damage. The kind of physical destruction that takes not weeks or months, but years to survive and painstakingly rebuild from. Doctors fought through surgery after surgery in those first weeks just to keep him alive. He remained unconscious for a long time, his body shutting down everything it didn't immediately need in order to preserve what little it could. And somewhere deep inside all of that physical devastation, inside a mind that had been violently shaken and completely broken by the force of that crash, something went terribly wrong. A memory formed. False. Vivid. Absolute. His traumatized brain took the last face he had seen before everything went dark, Renee's face, and placed her inside that wreckage right beside him. And when Kai John finally opened his eyes in that hospital bed weeks later, he woke up believing with every single broken piece of himself that the woman he loved had died in that crash right next to him. That was the truth nobody knew, and it would stay hidden for 8 long, devastating years. The trauma came for him the moment he opened his eyes. Not gradually, not in pieces, all at once, crashing through his mind like the accident was happening again in real time inside his head. The rain, the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness, the violent, unforgiving impact, and then her face. Renee, right there beside him in that car. His broken mind had placed her there so completely and so vividly that he never once questioned it. He could see her sitting right next to him. He could feel her presence in that vehicle. He could see the crash taking her, right there, right beside him on that dark, rainy highway. He remembered reaching for her before everything went dark and silent and still. A nurse appeared beside his bed one morning and found him staring at the ceiling with both hands gripped tight around the bed rail. "Mr. John," she said carefully, "can you tell me how you're feeling today?" Kai turned his head slowly toward her. His voice came out rough and unfamiliar. "There was a woman," he said quietly, "in the car with me." The nurse looked at him carefully. "The reports show you were the only person recovered from your vehicle, sir," she said gently. Kai looked back at the ceiling. She was there, he said, not arguing, not confused, just stating what his mind had shown him as absolute undeniable fact. The nurse made a note quietly and said nothing more. And Kai lay there in that hospital bed, broken his body and completely destroyed on the inside, grieving Renee in a silence so total and so private that not one single person in that building understood what he was actually carrying. The nightmares came every night without mercy. He would fall into a shallow, restless sleep, and within hours the crash would find him again. The rain, the road, the violence of that impact, and always her face right there beside him in the middle of all of it. He would wake up gasping, heart pounding, hands gripping the bed rail, her name somewhere in his chest that he couldn't release. One night a nurse came in after hearing him and stood beside his bed quietly. "The same dream again?" she asked softly. Kai sat up slowly and pressed both hands over his face. "It's not a dream," he said. His voice was completely flat. "It's what happened." The nurse pulled the chair close and sat beside him. "Mr. John, the doctors want to speak with you about what severe trauma can do to mind after an accident like yours. What you're experiencing, the things you're seeing every night. I know what I experienced," he said quietly, not harshly, just with the absolute certainty of a man who had no reason whatsoever to doubt what his own mind was showing him every single night. The nurse was quiet for a moment. Then she said gently, "Is there anyone we can call for you? Family? Anyone at all?" Kai looked at the wall for a long moment. "My brother," he said finally, "that's all." She nodded and left quietly. And Kai sat alone in the dark of that hospital room, breathing slowly, waiting for morning, carrying the weight of what he believed he had lost with completeness that had absolutely no bottom to it. His brother came within 2 days of the call. He walked into that hospital room and stopped in the doorway when he saw Kai. The weight he had lost, the stillness that had replaced everything that used to be sharp and commanding about him. He pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down without saying anything for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "You look terrible." Kai almost smiled. "Almost." "Thank you for coming," he said. His brother leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "How bad is it?" he asked, meaning the body, the injuries, the physical reality of what the doctors had already told him in the hallway before he came in. "Bad enough," Kai said, "but they say I'll recover." His brother nodded slowly. He looked at Kai for a long, careful moment, reading something in his face that went clearly beyond the physical damage. "And the rest of it?" he asked quietly. Kai looked at the ceiling. "Leave it," he said simply. His brother didn't push. That was the thing about him. He always knew when to push and when to simply be present without asking for anything in return. He stayed for 3 days that first visit, came back several more times over the months that followed, sat beside him, talked about small, ordinary things, never asked again about whatever was living behind Kai's eyes. He just showed up consistently and quietly. And for a man who had nobody else left in the world who truly knew his face, that simple, consistent presence was the only thing keeping some small part of him tethered to something human during those long, brutal hospital years. 3 years is a long time to rebuild a broken body. But Kai did it, stubbornly, painfully, day by exhausting day. The surgeries came and went. The rehabilitation pushed him past his absolute limit every single session. Slowly, so slowly his body came back. Strength returning in small increments that felt like nothing on the worst days and like everything on the rare good ones. The day the lead doctor finally sat across from him and said, "I think you're ready to go home." Kai looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "You're sure?" he asked. The doctor nodded. "Your body has done everything we needed it to do. The rest of the healing," he paused carefully, "will need to happen somewhere other than this room." Kai understood exactly what he was saying. He thanked him quietly, packed a small bag of things his brother had brought during one of his visits, and walked out of that hospital into daylight that felt too bright and too completely indifferent to everything that had happened inside those walls. He arranged the car back to Busan, sat in the back seat the entire journey, without speaking, watching the landscape move past a window, thinking about what he was returning to. He already knew what he would find. His mind had been telling him for 3 years. But knowing something and standing inside are two completely different things. And no amount of mental preparation makes walking to the door of a home that used to contain everything you ever loved feel like anything other than exactly what it is. He stood outside the door of his home for a long time before putting the key in. Then he pushed it open. The silence hit him first. Then the emptiness. Her things were gone. Every single trace of her presence carefully and completely removed. He walked through slowly. The bedroom, the living room, the kitchen where she used to stand on Sunday mornings while he sat at the counter watching her with that feeling he never got tired of. He stopped in the middle of that kitchen and just stood there. He pulled out the chair she always sat in at their kitchen table and looked at it for a long, still moment. Then he sat down in his own chair across from it, the way they used to sit across from each other, and looked at the empty space where she used to be. The coffee cup he had left on the counter in the morning he walked out was gone. Everything was gone. He pressed both hands flat on that kitchen table and looked at her empty chair for a very long time without moving. "I'm sorry," he said quietly into the empty room. His voice was low and completely steady, not breaking, just honest, like he needed to say it out loud even though there was nobody left to hear it. He sat there alone in that kitchen for a long time. Then he got up slowly, made himself a cup of coffee, stood at the window and looked out at the Busan skyline that used to feel like his, and began the long, quiet, devastating work of surviving inside a home that used to contain everything that had ever truly mattered to him. 5 years followed that felt like one long gray afternoon. Kai stayed in his home in Busan. He didn't rebuild his empire, didn't reach back into the world that had once moved carefully around his name. His wealth remained completely intact, untouched and sitting exactly where it had always been. But it meant absolutely nothing to him, not one single thing. He moved through his days without urgency or direction. Woke up, ate, sat with the silence. His brother called regularly. Short, simple calls, nothing complicated. "You eating properly?" his brother asked one evening. "Yes," Kai said. A brief pause. "You leaving the house at all?" "Sometimes," Kai said. His brother was quiet for a moment. "I'm coming next weekend," he said. "You don't have to." "I'm coming," his brother said simply. And he did. He showed up Saturday morning with food and filled the apartment with the ordinary sounds of someone else simply being present. And for those few hours, something in Kai that was usually completely closed opened just slightly. But then his brother left, and the silence came back. And the house went back to being just a house. The nightmares still came sometimes, less frequently than before. But when they came, they were as vivid and as devastating as ever. The rain, the road, her face right there beside him. He would wake up and sit on the edge of the bed in the dark and breathe through it until it passed. 5 years of that. 5 full years of a man with everything the world considers valuable, sitting completely alone inside all of it, surviving without truly living. It was his doctor who finally said what needed to be said. One afternoon during a routine checkup, the doctor sat back in his chair and looked at Kai with the directness of someone who had decided to stop being careful about something. "I need to speak to you honestly," the doctor said. Kai met his gaze steadily. "You always do." "Your body healed," the doctor said. "That took 3 years, and it was remarkable. But your mind has not healed. And it will not heal here. Not in this house. Not in this city. Not surrounded by the same walls and the same silence you've been sitting inside for 5 years now." Kai looked at him without responding. The doctor leaned forward slightly. I am not dismissing your grief. I am telling you that this environment is making it impossible for you to move through it. Your mind needs somewhere completely new. Somewhere it has no existing map for, no memories attached, no associations. Somewhere you can simply exist without carrying the full weight of everything the city holds for you. Kai was quiet for a long moment. Where? He asked. The doctor shrugged slightly. Anywhere that isn't here. Kai looked at the wall for a long, quiet moment. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, Incheon. He couldn't explain why that city came to him. It simply arrived without reason the way certain things do when a mind is finally ready to move even slightly forward. The doctor nodded once. Go, he said simply. Take a few weeks. Just exist somewhere else for a while. Kai drove home that evening and packed a single bag. He had absolutely no idea, not even the faintest shadow of notion, that the city he had just chosen was the exact same city where Renee Thompson had been quietly and painstakingly rebuilding her life for the past 8 years. 8 years. That was how long Renee had been in Incheon, long enough that it had become home in its own quiet way, softer than Busan, without the weight of everything she had left behind. She had built a good, stable life there. A good job. A warm apartment filled with Noah's drawings on the walls, and his shoes always in the wrong place by the front door no matter how many times she asked him to move them. Gloria lived 20 minutes away and came around regularly. Diane visited every few months without fail. Life was not perfect, but it was real and it was hers. Noah was 8 years old now. Sharp, curious, full of energy and questions about everything. He looked so much like Kai that sometimes Renee would catch herself watching him across the breakfast table and have to look away before the feeling in her chest became too much to hold quietly. One Tuesday evening in October, Noah came home from school quieter than usual. He dropped his bag by the door and sat at the kitchen table while Renee was cooking, just watching her without saying anything. She noticed but gave him space. Then he said, Mom. She turned around. Marcus said his dad is taking the football on Saturday, he said. And Jordan said his dad is coming on the school trip next month. He paused and looked at the table. How come I don't have a dad? Renee kept her expression completely steady even though something moved through her chest like a slow, heavy wave. She turned the heat down on the stove and came and sat across from him. Your dad had to go on a very long trip, baby, she said gently. Noah looked up at her with those serious eyes. How long? He asked. A very long time, she said softly. Noah thought about that quietly for a moment the way children do when they are trying to fit new information into the world they already understand. Does he know about me? He asked. Renee felt that question land somewhere very deep inside her. He knew I was going to have you, she said carefully. He was very happy about that. Noah nodded slowly. Will he come back? He asked quietly. Renee looked at her son, at his face, at Kai's features sitting so clearly on this 8-year-old boy who had never once met his father, and she held herself completely together for his sake. I don't know, baby, she said honestly but as gently as she possibly could. But what I do know is that you are so loved. By me, by Grandma Gloria, by Auntie Diane, every single day. Noah looked at her for a quiet moment. Then he said simply, okay, and picked up his fork. And that was that. But Renee sat across from him for the rest of that meal, holding everything she couldn't say completely still inside herself. Because he was 8 years old, and 8-year-olds deserve to carry only what 8-year-olds can carry. It was a Saturday morning in November when everything changed. Renee and Noah were at the Incheon street market together, a regular weekend habit of theirs. Slow and easy, Noah stopping every few minutes to look at something that caught his eye. It was completely and entirely ordinary. Renee was checking a price at one of the stalls when Noah tugged her sleeve. Mom, can we get those? She looked up to answer him, and her eyes moved naturally across the crowd the way eyes do in busy open spaces. And then everything inside her stopped, completely and absolutely stopped. On the other side of the market, maybe 20 feet away, standing with his back partially turned, was a man whose presence her entire body recognized before her mind had even caught up with what her eyes were seeing. The build, the way he stood, the set of his shoulders. She knew those things. She knew them in a place that lived deeper than rational thought entirely. He turned slightly. She saw his face. Her shopping bag dropped from her hand and hit the ground. Her breath left her body completely. Because a man standing 20 feet away from her in that crowded Incheon market on that completely ordinary Saturday morning, the man the whole of Busan had buried 8 years ago, was Kai John, alive, real, breathing, right there in front of her. Mom. Noah was looking up at her, pulling at her hand. Mom, what's wrong? Why did you drop that? She grabbed his hand so tightly, he looked up at her in surprise. We're going, she said, her voice coming out completely unrecognizable as her own. Right now, Noah. We're going right now. But Mom, we didn't finish. Now, she said firmly. And she moved. She ran. Through the crowd with Noah's hand gripped tightly in hers. Pushing past people, past stalls, past everything between her and the exit until they were out of that market and on the open street, and still she didn't stop. Noah was half running, beside her struggling to keep up. Mom, slowed down. What is happening? She didn't answer. She kept moving until they were inside their building, inside the elevator, inside the apartment with the door locked firmly behind her. Then she stood with her back flat against that door, breathing like she had run a far greater distance than she actually had. Noah stood in the middle of the room, watching her with wide, frightened eyes. Mom, he said quietly, you're really scaring me right now. She pushed herself off the door and crouched down in front of him and held his face gently in both hands. I'm okay, baby, she managed. I promise I'm okay. Go to your room for a little while, okay? I just need a minute. He searched her face with those serious eyes. Are you sure? Yes, she said steadily. Go on, baby. He went slowly, glancing back once before his bedroom door closed softly behind him. Renee straightened up, pressed both hands flat against the wall. Then she picked up her phone with fingers that were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it and called Gloria. It rang twice. Renee? Everything all right? Mama. Her voice broke completely on that single word. Mama, I just saw Kai. At the market. He was standing right there alive. Complete silence on the other end. Long and absolute. What? Gloria said very carefully. Renee, what are you saying to me? I saw him, Mama, Renee said. Her voice was shaking, but it was completely and absolutely certain. I saw his face. I know that face better than I know my own. That was Kai John standing in that market today. He was alive, Mama. Diane arrived 40 minutes after Renee called her, still in her house clothes, moving fast. She came through the door, took one look at Renee's face, and sat down beside her on the couch without any introduction at all. Tell me everything, she said simply. Renee told her. Every single detail, every second of those few moments at the market. The build, the face, the absolute physical certainty she had felt in her entire body the moment she saw him. Diane listened without interrupting once. When Renee finished, Diane was quiet for a long, careful moment. Then she said gently, Renee, that man died 8 years ago. We sat together and watched the news that night. We both, I know what we watched, Renee said firmly. I know exactly what the news said, Diane. I know what everyone believed. But I am telling you what these eyes saw today. That was Kai John. Diane looked at her for a long moment, reading her face, reading the certainty sitting deep in her eyes, measuring the difference between a grieving mind playing cruel tricks and a woman who knows absolutely and completely what she saw. Then she exhaled slowly and reached across and took both her hands firmly. Okay, she said quietly. I believe you. Renee looked at her. What do I do? Diane held her hands firmly. Nothing tonight, she said steadily. Tonight you breathe. Tonight you take care of Noah. And tomorrow we figure out what comes next, together. Renee nodded slowly. Neither of them slept that night. And across the city in a hotel room, Kai John sat completely alone on the edge of his bed. Utterly still, utterly silent, completely unable to move, because he'd seen her too. He had seen Renee Thompson standing alive and real and breathing in that crowded market. The woman his traumatized mind had shown him dying right beside him in that crash 8 years ago was alive. She was here, in this city, And every single thing he had believed and carried and grieved for 8 long, devastating years had just collapsed completely around him in one single ordinary moment on a Saturday morning in November. He found her the next morning. He had spent the entire night walking the streets of Incheon, not searching with any particular plan, just moving because staying still inside that hotel room felt completely impossible. Something that felt less like logic and more like gravity kept pulling him back toward the neighborhood near the market. He was standing on a quiet street corner when he saw her coming out of a small convenience store alone. No child with her, a bag in one hand, phone in the other. He stood completely still, making absolutely sure. Then he said her name across that quiet street. Renee. She stopped walking immediately. Every single muscle in her body went rigid at once. She stood completely still with her back to him for one long, suspended breath. Then slowly, so slowly, she turned around. They looked at each other across that quiet street for a long moment. 8 years of grief and silence and survival, sitting in the space between them like something physical. Her face had gone completely pale. His chest was barely moving. Kai, she said. The word came out like something she wasn't certain she was allowed to say out loud. Like saying it too loudly might make it disappear completely. He took one careful step toward her. It's me, he said quietly. I'm real. I'm right here, Renee. Her eyes filled immediately. You were dead, she whispered. The news said, everyone said, no survivors. I know what they said, he said steadily. Can we go somewhere and talk? Please, just the two of us. She looked at him for a long, trembling moment, taking in his face, his eyes, the reality of him standing right there in front of her alive and breathing after 8 years. Then she nodded once, and they walked. They found a quiet cafe 2 streets away and sat across from each other at a corner table far from anyone else. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat with the reality of being in the same room together after 8 years of believing the other was completely gone. Then Renee pressed both palms flat on the table and looked at him directly. Tell me everything, she said, from the beginning. And he did. He told her about waking up in a hospital far from Busan with no memory of how he got there, about the trauma hitting him the moment he opened his eyes, the crash playing over and over in his mind, her face right there beside him in that car, the false memory so vivid and so complete that he never once questioned it. I thought you were in that car with me, he said quietly. I could see you sitting right there beside me. I could feel you there. My mind showed me losing you in that crash so completely that I never had any reason to doubt it. Renee stared at him. Kai, I know, he said. I know how it sounds. But that is what my mind showed me. Every single night for years. Renee sat back slowly. She pressed one hand over her mouth. You thought I died, she said quietly. In that crash. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. I grieved you from that hospital bed. I came home to our empty house, and it confirmed everything my broken mind had already told me. Renee felt tears fill her eyes. I thought you were dead, she said. The news said no survivors. I called your brother. He had nothing. No body. No information. Nothing. Kai closed his eyes for a moment. Nobody in that hospital knew about you, he said. You were my private world. There was nobody to call you. Nobody who even knew you existed in my life. The silence that followed was heavy and full and completely devastating. 2 people who had spent 8 years grieving each other, sitting across a small cafe table, finally understanding what had actually happened to them. Kai reached into his pocket and placed a card on the table between them. There is someone I need you to meet, he said quietly. Before anything else, before you decide anything about any of this, I need you to understand what happened to my mind in that crash. Not just from me, from someone who can explain it properly. 2 days later, Renee sat in a small medical office beside Kai while his doctor, the man who had treated him through 3 years of recovery, sat across from them both. He was a quiet, measured man who chose his words carefully. What Mr. John experienced, the doctor began, looking at Renee directly, is something we see in cases of severe traumatic brain injury. The mind, when damaged severely enough, does not always distinguish between what actually happened and what it feared most. In Mr. John's case, the trauma was catastrophic. His brain took the person he loved most, the last face he saw before the impact, and place her inside the crash. It constructed a memory so complete and so vivid that his mind accepted it as absolute reality. Renee sat completely still, listening to every word. "He genuinely believed I was in that car," she said quietly. The doctor nodded. "Completely and without any doubt whatsoever," he said. This was not confusion. This was not denial. This was his brain, severely damaged, filling gaps of the thing it feared losing most. Renee looked at Kai sitting beside her. He was looking at the floor. His jaw was tight. His hands were folded in his lap. "Kai," she said softly. He looked up at her. His eyes were completely full. She reached across and placed her hand over his. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. They didn't need to. Something that had been sitting between them, heavy and unresolved and enormous, shifted quietly in that small medical office. And for the first time since she had seen him standing in that market, Renee felt something other than shock and confusion and grief. She felt the beginning of understanding. And understanding, even when it arrives 8 years too late, changes everything. She told him about Noah on the walk back from the doctor's office. They were moving slowly along a quiet Incheon street, side by side, the afternoon light falling pale and gentle across the pavement between them. She had been carrying the words for 2 days, turning them over, finding the right moment, not knowing if there was a right moment for something like this. Then she simply said it. "Kai." He looked at her. "You have a son." He stopped walking, completely and immediately. "His name is Noah," she said. "He is 8 years old, and he looks exactly like you." The color drained from Kai's face so completely and so quickly that for a moment she thought his legs might give way beneath him. He stood completely still on that pavement, not speaking, not moving, barely breathing. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Then his eyes filled in a way she had never seen from him before, not even in the most tender moments of everything they had shared. He pressed one hand slowly over his mouth. His shoulders dropped. 8 years, he said. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "He has been here for 8 years. "Yes," Renee said softly. Kai looked at her with eyes that were completely devastated and completely overwhelmed all at once. "Does he?" he started. "He knows his dad had to go away on a long trip," Renee said gently. "That is all he knows." Kai nodded slowly. He looked down at the pavement for a long moment. Then he looked back up at her. "Can I meet him?" he asked. His voice was quiet and completely honest. Not demanding, not assuming. Just a man asking for the most important thing he had ever asked for in his entire life. "Yes," Renee said. "Come for dinner tonight." That evening, Kai stood outside Renee's apartment door and straightened his jacket and took one long, slow breath before she opened it. Noah was sitting at the kitchen table doing his homework. He looked up when the door opened. He looked at Kai standing in the doorway. Then he looked at his mother. "Mom," he said quietly. "He looks like me." Renee felt something break open inside her chest in the most beautiful way. "Come in," she said to Kai softly. Kai stepped inside slowly. He stood a few feet from Noah and looked at his son for the very first time. This 8-year-old boy with his jaw and his eyes and his quiet intensity, and something in him that had been broken for 8 long years, simply and quietly came undone. "Hi, Noah," he said. His voice was low and careful and completely full. Noah looked at him for a long, curious moment. "Are you my dad?" he asked simply. The directness of it, the pure, uncomplicated innocence of those 4 words, hit every single person in that room like something physical. Kai crouched down slowly until he was at eye level with his son. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am." Noah looked at him carefully, the way children look at something new. They are deciding what to do with. Then he said, "Where did you go?" Kai held his son's gaze without flinching. "Very far away," he said honestly, "but I'm back now, and I'm not going anywhere ever again." Noah considered that for a moment. Then he nodded once, satisfied in the simple, decisive way that only children can be satisfied, and said, "Okay, do you want to see my drawings?" Kai felt something move through him so completely that he had to press his lips together to hold himself together. "I would love to see your drawings," he said. And Noah took his father's hand and led him across the apartment, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Gloria was in the kitchen doorway with both hands pressed over her mouth and tears running silently down her face. Diane stood beside her, gripping her arm, her own eyes completely full, watching the scene in the living room with a particular expression of someone witnessing something they never thought they would see. Renee stood in the middle of it all and looked at the man she had never stopped loving sitting on the floor of their apartment with their 8-year-old son showing him crayon drawings. And she felt the life she had always deserved finally and completely arriving. 3 weeks later, Kai sat across from Renee at their kitchen table, their new kitchen table, in the brand-new home he had bought for all three of them in Incheon, with Noah's shoes already in the wrong place by the front door, and he looked at her for a long, quiet moment before he spoke. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Renee looked at him steadily. "Tell me," she said. And he did. He told her everything. The business, the illegal world he had operated in for years, the truth behind the meetings and the closed-door phone calls, and the trips she had never fully understood. He told her all of it plainly and without defense. She sat across from him and listened without interrupting once. When he finished, the kitchen was very quiet. "I'm done with it," he said. "All of it. That world almost cost me everything. It did cost me 8 years. It cost Noah 8 years of having a father. And I am telling you right now that it is over. Completely and permanently over." Renee looked at him for a long, careful moment. "I need you to mean that," she said quietly. "Not for me, for him." Kai held her gaze without flinching. "I mean it," he said, "with everything I have." She looked at him for another long moment. Then she nodded slowly. And that was enough. Outside the window of their new home, the Incheon skyline stretched out quietly in the evening light. Inside, Noah was laughing at something in the next room, loud and completely uninhibited the way children laugh when they feel entirely safe. Kai reached across the table and took Renee's hand. She looked down at his hand over hers. Then she looked up at him. And for the first time in 8 long, devastating years, Renee Thompson felt completely and entirely whole.